What we're going to do is we're going to find the inverse of each equation. When we're finding the inverse, what we're doing is we're switching the x values. So the inverse of a function is when the y values are now the x values and the x values are now the y values. So that means when we're writing an inverse equation, our first step is always to switch the x and the y. The -1 means inverse. And what we're going to do is we're going to undo the equation by doing the opposite operation, starting with the outside and then working to the inside. So our first step is to subtract the 1 because we're adding 1. Next step is to get rid of the square root by squaring. And then what we do is we add the 2, and that gives us our final answer. So when we're looking at example 1, always the first step is switching the x and the y. Now instead of putting f of x, I'm just going to put y. It's just a little bit simpler to write. And then at the very end, I'm going to put it in its more formal form. Starting with the outside, I'm going to subtract the 3. So x minus 3 equals the square root of y minus 1. Then I square both sides. So x minus 3 squared is equal to y minus 1. And then I add the 1. So I have x minus 3 squared plus 1 equals y. Now I'm going to write in its formal form. So I'm going to put -1, and that means the inverse. So the inverse of f of x is equal to x minus 3 squared plus 1. Now for letter B. This is a cube root, but the process is the same. I switch the x, and I'm going to replace the g of x with the y. And what I'm going to do is undo the equation by doing everything from the outside first. So I'm going to add the 4. And then in order to get rid of a cube root, I'm going to cube it. So y plus 4 cubed. And then I'm going to subtract the 5. And I'm going to write it in its final form. So I'm going to have the inverse of g of x is equal to x plus 4 cubed minus 5. Now, looking at letter C, once again, my first step, I'm going to switch the x and the y. Then I'm going to add the 1. And then I'm going to divide by 2. Then I'm going to cube both sides. And I'm cubing the binomial, but the 2, when I cube it, it becomes an 8. So I'm going to subtract the 3. And since my y is negative, I'm going to switch all the signs, and I'm going to write it in its formal form. So I'm going to put h of x, and it's the inverse. And when I divide by negative, I get negative x plus 1 cubed over 8, and then I have plus 3. So looking at letter D, once again, what we're going to do is first switch. So I have x, and then I have y plus 4 plus 7. I subtract the 7. X minus 7 is equal to the square root of y plus 4. Opposite of a square root is squaring it. So that gives me an x minus 7 squared is equal to y plus 4. And then I subtract the 4. So That gives me x minus 7 squared minus 4 is equal to y, and I write it in its formal form. So I have f of x, and I'm going to put the inverse is equal to x minus 7 squared minus 4. Now our last one, once again, an inverse is when we switch x and y. So we have x is equal to negative cube root, and then we have y minus 3 plus 1. I'm going to subtract the 1, so x minus 1 equals negative cube root of y minus 3. I divide by negative 1, so I have x minus 1, negative 1, and then I cube it. When I cube it, I'm going to cube the top, and I'm going to cube the negative 1. So that gives me x minus 1 cubed. Since it's negative 1, I'm just going to bring it to the top for the next round. That gives me y minus 3. And so when I add the 3, I'm going to write it in my formal. G of x, and then inverse is equal to, I have the negative in the front, and then I have the x minus 1 cubed, and then I add the 3, so I have a plus 3.